Welcome into a special edition of the 3D Dynasty podcast brought to you by Sports Gambling Podcast Network. It's your boy FF Bourbon Dude and my normal host, but not host tonight, in Dynasty Dorks, Dave Howman. And we have special guest in Denver Beat reporter from the DNVR.com, Zach Stevens. Zach, thank you so much for joining us tonight. How are you doing, man?
Oh, thanks for having me on, guys. It's great to be talking football, and, you can talk football 12 months of the year.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, right? We just wrapped up the draft. We're going to get into, like we said, the Denver Broncos. And I can't help but ask, doing a little bit of research, Zach, it seems like you've been a lifelong Denver Broncos fan. So who is, just let's ice break a little bit. Who is your favorite Denver Bronco of all time?
Man, I mean, you could start with the stars and the quarterbacks, of course. I mean, those take the headlines. John Elway, Peyton Manning. Also throw Tim Tebow in the mix there. Yeah. He had a pretty magical season with the Broncos. But just going personal favorite for me, I'm going to go Al Wilson. He was a fantastic linebacker for the Broncos and was just a monster on the field. His career was cut short due to a neck injury, actually. But, man, he was so good and really on a Hall of Fame path before getting injured. So I'll go there. Also, Steve Atwater, just an incredible safety for the Broncos, Hall of Fame safety. He fantastic and also just such an awesome guy, too.
I love it. I love it. And it's hard to pass up on some of those big names, right? But the defensive players, they just don't get enough, right? When I watch the Denver Broncos now, I love watching some of these cornerbacks and Patrick Surtain and saying, this dude, like if I get to watch this guy for 10 years play at that kind of level, oh man, I get to tell my grandkids, hey, I got to watch Patrick Surtain play, like I'd be all about that, So
that's exactly it. And I mean, Champ Bailey is another easy one to throw in there. And we're already kind of getting into the area with Pat Surtain where it's not crazy to say that he could be on a Champ Bailey type of path right now. His first year was really, really good as a rookie. Didn't get any accolades. His second year, he wins every single first team All-Pro award that was given out by anyone. He was a Pro Bowler, starter in the Pro Bowl, and there's really no reason to believe that he's going to slow down. So, I mean, yeah, that's a great one right off the top of your head right there, and a guy who for the next 10 years should be elite.
Fingers crossed. I've got a few friends that are Denver fans, so I hope for them just as well as you that is actually the case. So, all right. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit. So I'm a big Cleveland Browns fan. I got some Browns helmets up here, assigned football. And again, doing a little creepy stalker stuff, I noticed that you happen to be a remote scout for the Cleveland Browns, my Cleveland Browns. So I got to ask, who was your favorite or most successful scouting situation while you were in your tenure with the Cleveland Browns?
Yeah, so I was doing scouting for the Browns 2014 and 2015 draft classes. No, 2015 and 2016 draft classes. Started in 2014 and went through those two drafts. And I got to say, there was not many successes at all when I was there. I mean, that's the Johnny Manziel draft. That's when things were just in the dark ages for the Browns. I mean, I guess the dark ages have been pretty long, unfortunately, for you. But one big hit, which was nice. Joel Bitonio, of course, the guard, five-time Pro Bowler, drafted in either the second or the third round. So it wasn't an obvious slam dunk pick right when it happened. But man, he's just turned out to be not only a great player, but a great person as well. And I remember watching his tape, and it just seemed like, especially from an interior offensive lineman, those guys, sometimes they don't really stand out on tape when you're watching a lot of them, but he absolutely did. And then he's just continued that in the NFL.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite. That's one of my favorite things about the Browns in general is just that offensive line. So I'm really glad that happened to be one of them, and it wasn't somebody I was like, oh man, yeah, that didn't really
There were plenty of stinkers that I watched too, but at least there was at least one success in there.
I like it. All right. Well, we're obviously not here to talk Browns. We are going to get into the Denver Broncos. And we'll start with kind of the pre-draft, right? So we saw the Denver Broncos trade their first-round picks. They achieved Russell Wilson in the last offseason. Then they do it again this year, trade a first and go and get their coach, hopefully their coach of the future in Sean Payton. So, Zach, does should people be excited that, hey, we moved our first round picks for Russell Wilson and Sean Payton? How's the city feeling about it? What's the vibe? Just how's it going right now?
The trade for Russell Wilson went through unofficially 14 months ago from today, and the tone back then couldn't be a different 180 from what it is right now about the trade. At first, it honestly felt like the Broncos got away with murder by trading 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, and a couple of good players in Noah Fant, Shelby Harris, and then backup quarterback Drew Lockett. It really felt like, man, that's all the Broncos had to give up in order to have their quarterback for the next 7 to 10 years. When Russ got here, he actually said 12 years is how much longer he wanted to play. It felt like, especially in just dark ages again, that the Broncos had been in with the quarterback situation since Peyton Manning left. It was like, wow, this is all it's going to cost. What a fantastic trade. Russell Wilson coming off what people thought was a bad season, 25 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. That's incredible play for a quarterback, especially when you're dealing with just the revolving door of quarterbacks that the Broncos have had. So 14 months ago, this trade was an absolute lock. It was a steal for the Broncos. And then everyone actually saw how it unfolded last year and the entire nation. I mean, you guys saw it firsthand. The Broncos had almost the max number of primetime games, and every time they were on primetime, it was the Broncos were scoring 9 points a game. I think they averaged 10 points a game in their primetime games. And they didn't average much more outside of those primetime games. The worst offense in the NFL. And obviously it was a disaster with the coach as well, with Nathaniel Hackett. Nathaniel brought so much energy, and it looked like he was going to bring, the offense that produced back-to-back MVPs and Aaron Rodgers the previous 2 years. And it just couldn't have been more of a disaster. So if you want to look at it now, people in Denver are certainly down on the trade. The Broncos ended up giving up a top 5 overall pick and the 9th overall pick last year for it. And on top of that, so everyone's very down on it. But if you want to have some hope around it, Sean Payton is one of the best offensive masterminds this game has ever seen. If you look at the success that he had in New Orleans, it's unprecedented just how many times the Saints were the best offense in the NFL, the best passing attack. So if anyone was going to turn Russell Wilson around, it would be Sean Payton. And so he's in charge to do that. And so you got to think, giving up just 1 first-round pick for Sean Payton, if there's anyone that's going to turn Russ around and get this organization back on track, it was going to be him. And people, if you want to be optimistic, you look at the final 2 games of what Russell Wilson did last year after they'd fired Nathaniel Hackett, when they brought in an interim head coach, and Russell Wilson played the best ball of his season last year. Wasn't saying a lot, but it was still much better than we had seen from the rest of the season. And so you think, man, if an interim head coach and people that put together this playbook for him with 1 week's notice, if they can do that with Russ, can't Sean Payton take him to another level? So there's a very, very, very guarded optimism surrounding this a little bit, and the hope that Sean Payton can turn Russell Wilson around.
Yeah, I love it. And part of that is Sean Payton and the offensive staff and the GM and player personnel and all of that doing some of these off-season moves. I know they addressed the offensive line. So, Dave, I know you've got a question around some of these off-season moves for Zach as well.
Yeah, and so Sean Payton, it always seemed like they were printing money in New Orleans, always kind of the cap gymnastics and things like that. And it seems like he's carried that over to Denver. They've spent a lot of money. They knew they didn't have a lot of draft capital, so they were extremely aggressive during the offseason. They added Ben Powers, Mike McGlinchey to the offensive line, 2 really good offensive linemen, but a lot of people do think they overpaid for those offensive linemen. What are the thoughts there? PFF gave you an A- for your offseason as far as the free agency. What's the vibe there as far as what they've done so far, specifically with the offensive and defensive line?
Yeah, I mean, they just spent so much money in the trenches, and I'm happy you mentioned at the end there that they did spend on the defensive side of the ball too. They lost Draymond Jones in free agency, but replaced him nearly with a very similar player in Zach Allen. Spent over $15 million a year on Zach Allen. And Sean Payton, one of the first things he did when he got to New Orleans in 2006 was he spent a lot of resources on their offensive line to build it up, to help whatever quarterback it was going to be. Turned out, ended up being Drew Brees, and he built that offensive lineup in order to give Drew Brees success. It's exactly what he's doing. He's taking that exact same philosophy to Denver and with Russell Wilson. Like you said, spending $13 million on Ben Powers, spending almost $18 million a year on Mike McGlinchey. And Mike McGlinchey, they did overpay for him, and they kind of admitted it. They made it very clear that we're going to give you the best offer out there, and so we want to lock you down. That's why they were able to lock both of those guys down within the first 2 hours of free agency. So it's a very fair criticism that the Broncos overpaid for those guys, but Sean Payton didn't care. He said, this is my number one priority. I'm going to need to do this. And you also mentioned that with New Orleans, they just kept spending money, even when it seemed like they didn't have money, and kind of got them into a really bad situation that New Orleans is still in right now. And it honestly seems like New Orleans is just continuing to go down that path. And it's very clear Sean Payton brought that philosophy here. He's on a 5-year deal with the Broncos, and he's going to make sure that he doesn't have a rebuilding couple of first years. He wants to win right now, and the Broncos are $30 million above the cap for 2024 already. And coming into this year, the Broncos were in a good cap situation. So it just shows the Sean Payton effect. And for Broncos fans, that's a positive because they haven't won in so long that he wants to turn them around. And then you even see it in the draft. The Broncos don't have a first or a second round pick. And what does Sean Payton and the general manager, George Payton, do? They trade up to get into the second round in order to get Marvin Mims. And they trade up again to get in the third round to draft a cornerback, Riley Moss out of Iowa. So he's very aggressive, and he's going to spend those resources. He's not going to wait.
Yeah, I love it. We talked about the offensive line, and then we took that into the defensive line. But before that, I just want to reiterate, we are here with Zach Evans. That is at Zach, Z-A-C, Stevens, DNVR on Twitter. You can find his work at thednvr.com. And talking about the offensive line, he's got an article. Make sure you get out there and check it out as to why he thinks these additions to the offensive line could make the Denver Broncos on the bottom half of the league in sacks allowed, which is what every team wants. They want to be one of the better offensive lines and allow the least number of sacks possible. So make sure you check his work out at thednvr.com. So we talked about the defensive line a little bit. You know, you lost Bradley Chubb in the last offseason. They bring in, you didn't lose him. You traded him. You bring in Vance Joseph as the defensive coordinator. What do people have to look forward to with Vance Joseph and some of this newly revamped defensive line that you talk about?
Oh, Vance Joseph, what a story. Was the Broncos coach, head coach, then got fired after 2 very disappointing seasons. But he was dealt a tough card because he wasn't given a good quarterback situation. And you guys know how it is in the NFL. If you don't have a good quarterback, you've got to overcome a lot of things in order to get good quarterback or bad quarterback play to turn into wins. And so that's what Vance Joseph was dealt. He comes back here to Denver as just managing the defensive side. And Vance Joseph brings an aggressive defense. And that's going to be key for this Broncos team. Vance Joseph's going to have to line these guys up in the right position in order to get after the quarterback. Because like you said, Broncos did not have a lot of success, especially after trading Bradley Chubb last year. They did not have success in the second half of the season getting after the quarterback. The Broncos do have some talent there, specifically Randy Gregory. Paid him $14 million per season, and he's just a guy when he's healthy, he can be a game wrecker, but that's a pretty big if. And so Vance Joseph's going to have to dial up pressure from other ways. Baron Browning is a talented pass rusher who converted from inside linebacker to outside linebacker in order to brush the passer last year, but that's going to be a big key for the Broncos and really determine their ceiling of how good this defense is how effectively can they get after the passer, because that secondary, they just re-signed Kareem Jackson to go along with Justin Simmons, making one of the best safety duos in the NFL. And then you have Pat Surtain, one of the, if not the best cornerbacks in the league. So their secondary is going to be great. Run support, it's going to be good enough. It's just about how effective Vance Joseph is at being able to dial up pressure. And because they have Pat Surtain, I expect a lot of blitzing coming from this Broncos defense in order to get after these quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about Marvin Mims a little bit earlier. We're talking about the defense now. They did add some in the some on the defensive side of the ball in the third round. And Dave, I'm gonna kick this question over you to you regarding the NFL draft.
Yeah, so we'll go back to Marvin Mims. So I'll go to the defensive side of the ball and our IDP guys. I'm not sure if you know what that is, Zach, but our IDP guys are going to love Drew Sanders. Drew Sanders, an Alabama transfer. He had 9.5 sacks. He was behind the line of scrimmage all over the field last year, and you guys got him in the third round. And then you got Riley Moss, and then you got JL Skinner. He's a little bit of a slower corner, but he's also one of those guys that can play close to the line of scrimmage, support the run, and he's a versatile player for that defense. So what are your thoughts about those three players on the defense? I think maybe two could end up being starters for you this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And specifically with Drew Sanders, I mean, he is one of the more interesting prospects in the entire draft. A little surprised, actually, that he fell to the Broncos in the 60s, because he is a guy where when you're trying to understand what position he plays, you kind of similarly compare it to Micah Parsons. Now, he's certainly not Micah Parsons in terms of a player, or else he would have been a top 5 pick in this draft. But being able to play inside, being able to play outside, and then blitz is just huge. He was the number 1 recruit coming out of the state of Texas. That's pretty impressive. Went to Alabama, was playing at Alabama, but just wanted to be able to do whatever he wanted. Nick Saban wasn't going to allow that to happen. So he went to Arkansas, where they opened him with open arms, and he had 100 tackles last year with 13.5 tackles for a loss and almost 10 sacks. Just shows that he can be an inside outside guy. And with all three of those guys that you talked about, I don't think any of them are going to be week 1 starters this year, but if by the middle of the season, I wouldn't be surprised if 2 of the 3 are starting. And then really next year, Riley Moss should be a starting cornerback for the Broncos. And then you also have Drew Sanders, who is pretty much penciled in to be that starter come next year. And Drew Sanders is a guy who he brings playmaking to that inside linebacker position. And that's tough to find, especially with the Broncos. They've had some very solid inside linebackers. In fact, they have 2 right now who are going to be the starters week 1 in Josie Jewell and Alex Singleton, but they're not game-changing type of players consistently. You get that potential with Drew Sanders.
Any second-year breakout guys on the defense we should look for, like maybe Nick Bonito or anyone like that?
Man, Nick Bonito's rookie year was just so disappointing. He was the Broncos' first pick in the draft last year, although being a second-round pick, but the Broncos didn't have their first-round pick when they gave it up for Russell Wilson. And Nick Bonito, like I said, there's Randy Gregory and Bradley Chubb were the starters, but then there was just so much opportunity for another outside linebacker to step up. And instead of it being Nick Bonito, you saw 3 or 4 other guys get opportunities before Nick Bonito. So the Broncos honestly aren't really counting on him being that guy this year. So if he were to break out, that would be such a pleasant surprise and something that's very needed, because they have to get after the quarterback. Greg Dulcich kind of broke out on the scene last year, especially from a fantasy perspective, had some games where he was just blowing up. I don't get the feeling that Sean Payton is as high on him as the Broncos were last year. So Sean Payton's going to use him, but I don't think he's set to take that next step this year. I think it's going to be much more of a slow progression for Greg and Sean's offense.
And transition right to the offense like a pro. So Marvin Mims was really, I mean, you got a center in the 7th round, but really Marvin Mims being your first pick, you're already pretty good at the receiver position, one of the better receiving rooms in the draft. And Courtland Sutton, all the rumors, when I saw the Marvin Mims pick, I expected Courtland Sutton to be traded that night or over in the morning, on the next day. You got Tim Patrick coming back from injury, Javonte Williams coming back from injury. You added Samaje Perine. This is a pretty good set of weapons for Sean Payton to play with. What do you think the offense is going to look like this year?
Yeah, I mean the talent's definitely there. It's just all kind of come down to Russell Wilson and Javonte Williams. The team, the closer we get to the start of the season, the less confident the team is that he's going to be ready to go week one. So that's a big thing to watch specifically for fantasy purposes. And Samaje Perine right now, he's going to be the Broncos' bell cow. He's never been a bell cow running back before, so you got to be a little uneasy there. But what I expect this offense to look like is drastically different than last year's offense. Last year's offense was all about letting Russ cook. It was all about giving Russell Wilson whatever he wanted, letting him throw the ball as much as he wanted. That's what Nathaniel Hackett pretty much said from the day he was hired. And at first, it made a lot of sense. When you have a superstar quarterback, just let them do their thing. Well, it turns out Russell Wilson needs a lot of help in order to be the Russell Wilson of old. And so Sean Payton's made it very clear he's going to give Russell Wilson that help by kind of taking the keys away from him. This is going to be not a true run-first offense, but in today's NFL, it's going to be one of the more run-heavy teams that we see, and then let Russell Wilson work off play action. Let Russell Wilson really focus on just throwing the deep ball instead of trying to manipulate the line of scrimmage like Peyton Manning used to do it and these great quarterbacks do. I think Sean's really going to take a lot off his plate. The one line that Sean used was, we got to take Russ off of the high dive. We got to take some things away from him in order for him to play better. So while I think that the Broncos on paper, especially if Javonte Williams isn't healthy, it doesn't seem like a running team. They're going to commit to the run until Russell Wilson really gets comfortable in this offense. And you look at Ben Powers and Mike McGlinchey, two really good run blocking offensive linemen that they went and spent money on. And you mentioned Marvin Mims. I think even with a crowded receiver room, Marvin Mims is going to have a pretty substantial role on this offense. It's easy to say, well, you have Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick. Marvin Mims is going to be your number 4 receiver. That's not going to be the case. I think Marvin Mims is at least going to be your number 3 receiver and have the opportunity to put up big-time production. He is the Broncos' deep threat. Russell Wilson, one of the things that he does the best is throw that moon ball deep, and I think Marvin Mims might capitalize on that more than anyone else on this team, and we've seen it. Well, Sean Payton has had 3 rookie 1,000-yard receivers. I'm not necessarily saying that Marvin Mims is going to do that, but Sean Payton is not afraid to play a rookie. And Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, all of those guys were here before Sean Payton. Those aren't his guys. Marvin Mims is his guy. That was his first pick in the draft with the Broncos that they traded up for. So I do think, especially for a rookie, a second-round pick, he's going to have quite a role.
Yeah, I traded up for Marvin Mims in my rookie draft today. I'm a big Marvin Mims guy. I'm going to steal that stat. And I've been talking about, he's always had a Brandon Cooks, a Lance Moore, a Devery Henderson, someone that's going to really stretch the defense. And you look at that play action pass, he made magic with Tyler Lockett. And none of those guys have that skill set that Marvin Mims does. The ball tracking, the body control, the deep field. It's a skill being able to catch the ball that way, similar to a center fielder versus, doing a catch over the middle of the field 5 yards out. So the last question I have about offense, do you think there's any other moves they're going to make this offseason? There's a couple running backs and older running backs, Ezekiel Elliott, Leonard Fournette, Kareem Hunt, that are out there looking for work. There's probably a couple older receivers, but really not much there as far as the other positions. But any other moves to expect from the Broncos, or is this it?
Yeah, you mentioned one of the running backs. Kareem Hunt is a name to keep an eye on for the Broncos. The Broncos had some interest in Kareem before free agency started, and things they wanted to wait through the draft. They didn't draft a running back in the draft, and so now I think Kareem Hunt is a guy that they could bring in. Like I said, Samaje Perine is a very good complementary back. He's proven that in the NFL. He was very good complementary back with the Bengals, with Joe Mixon, but he's never proven to be a bell cow type of back. He's 240 pounds. And if you don't have Javonte Williams for the first half of the season, your backup right now is Tony Jones Jr., who has only taken a couple of snaps at running back and only had a couple of carries in his career. So I think they really need to add not just a complement to Samaje, but maybe even a number 1 to Samaje until Javonte Williams is back. So I think Kareem Hunt's the name to keep an eye on.
No, I love that. I was definitely thinking they were going to add a running back, someone like a Devin A. Chain or one of the pass catching specialists. I knew they weren't going to get Gibbs, but No, I love it. Appreciate it. Brad, what do you got for us?
Yeah. Hey, I think that's it. Zach, we're going to get you out of here. Let everybody know where they can find you and your work.
Yeah, I'm over at Zach Stevens DNVR on Twitter. And then, like you said, thednvr.com. Really appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah. Hey, no, we appreciate it. And we'll kick everybody your way for sure for any Denver Broncos questions. So,
All right, thanks, Zach.
I appreciate it, guys.
all right. Appreciate it. Without further ado, hey, good luck this season and cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks, guys. Really enjoyed being on. Have a good night.
You too.
Cool.